We've been at IDHE, we've been attending some of these college student voter summits, and it's been like a real pleasure to talk with folks that are working on college campuses and in so many different states around the country. And I'm formerly from student affairs, and so this is kind of near and dear to my heart. Before I came to IDHE, that's my background. So I will dive in here. So we're going to talk a little bit about the state of Oklahoma, NSLVE, and the study that we run at IDHE, and generally the state of college student political engagement in the US. Oh, and I should note, if you're interested in the work that we do and kind of want to follow along and learn a little bit more, you can follow us on Twitter at TuftsIDHE. So I have that at the bottom there, but we also have it at the end of those slides. So who are we and what do we do at IDHE? So the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education is based at Tufts University, which is a school just a little bit north of Boston, out in Massachusetts. We're based at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. It's kind of a unique structure at our school. We have a College of Engineering, a College of Arts and Sciences, many things that you'll see around the nation at US schools. But we are the only one with a College of Civic Life, which means that we have faculty that affiliate with us. We have a civic studies major that's now in its second year. And we have a programs team, and then we have about half of our staff is on the research side of things. So there's an organization you may have heard of called Circle, who do youth civic engagement. And then there's our office, IDHE, and we spun off of Circle about 7 years ago. So generally speaking, our office works to study and improve a whole host of issues at that intersection you might expect of higher ed and US democracy. We look at things like college student voting, political equity, discourse, classroom teaching, and we do a lot of work around campus climate for political learning. And then we have kind of sub areas of interest. So like I study digital spaces and things like misinformation and college student activism. On our website, I'll share this again at the end, but we have a ton of resources. I'll talk a lot about our voting study, but there are many things that you'd find on our website that may interest you, even if the voting study isn't something that is sort of your primary area of focus. But we have discussion guides on things like free speech and inclusion on campus, discussing your campus voting report. We have a training guide for facilitators on political discussions. And in the center there, I'll highlight this, where it says, today we protest, tomorrow we vote. That is our newest release, Action Imperatives 2020. So you all will get the first description of that we've had actually. So the thing that our office is probably most known for is the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, which we call NSLVE for short. So this is based on the principle that colleges and universities around the country often talk about a civic mission, preparing students for civic life or for being engaged in their society after graduation. But it's really hard to measure. So it's one of those things that's really easy to talk about. I think everyone in the room here probably has seen some evidence of that. So this idea came about around 8 years ago, and there was a question of like, can we see like what's happening on college campuses? Because there's a lot of assumptions about, are college students voting? Are they apathetic? Are they hyper engaged? And you'll hear all sorts of arguments depending on who's making the argument. So what our study was founded to do is to see, and measure this. So NSLVE is just that. It's a free service to campuses. Schools already report data to the National Student Clearinghouse in over 3,000 schools in the country. And so what we do is the school, it's a 2-page sign-up form. And it just needs to be signed off by someone at the signatory level, which is usually like a president or vice president or dean. And what that does is we start a process in which we take the public voting record, which is just kind of if you registered and if you voted, but not like party or any of that stuff. It becomes anonymized, and then we pair that with the campus data that's prepared for the National Student Clearinghouse. And in that process, what we get back from that is we can show you on your school, like when you sign up individually, here's how many students registered to vote, here's how many voted, and then of the students who registered, here's how many voted. And then you get this packet that gives you about a dozen pages worth of data that'll say like, by age, here's who's participating. By sex, here's who's participating. And it breaks down across a number of categories, including things like fields of study. So you can see which majors really are most active. Like I said, this study started in the last decade. So we have data for 2012, 14, 16, and 18. And then next year we'll release the 2020 data. It takes a couple months for states to certify elections in terms of specific numbers. And then once we have those, we're able to start the process to prepare these reports. For us, this is also a really important database for research. So we have those campus reports that get sent out, but then we also have a large database so we can look at the national numbers and report out what we're seeing across the country. You know, part of how I describe this is I say it was kind of an attempt to see, you know, like I talk about like we were figuring this out at the beginning. It's been a pretty successful project. So we have over 1,100 institutions now in this, including, I think it's either 50 or 49 of the flagship institutions around the country for each state. Every state is participating in this. And that 1,100 colleges and universities number translates to over 10 million college students represented in this. And depending on how you count, there's around 18 million students in the country. So well over half of all students are represented in the data for NSLVE. Like I said, when you get a campus report, you get some top line numbers, and then you get some more specific breakdowns. This on the right here shows you what that kind of like the front page looks like, right? It's like the general number, how many people voted. So if we dig in a little bit here, for those of you that participate, and I think Oklahoma's actually like one of the lower states in terms of numbers of campuses that participate. So I'll definitely leave some time at the end for questions. If you're thinking about, is this worth us signing up? Like, should we take the time to fill out the form? But I'll give you a quick glimpse into what it is that you get if you sign up for it. So like I said, we have a cover page and then kind of like an about this report on the inside cover. But then the first big page is this. You see your voting rate. So this is a sample campus that has a voting rate of 46.4%. And then it shows you what your change was from the previous comparable election. So for us, we compare midterm elections because that's, you know, in political science, that's more of the comparable thing. You don't necessarily want to compare the presidential year to a midterm because midterm rates nationally are just lower. 2018, which I'll describe in a minute, was really an amazing election to look at. In this sample campus, you see a huge jump from 2014 up to 2018. And then we also provide some context because you might say, well, is 46.4% good? Like, is it above the average? Is it below? This was our voting rate for all institutions. On average was 39.1%. We give you the registration rate, which is just how many students signed up to register. And then of those registered students, how many of them turned out. And then you get the yield rate, which is 61.7% there. And then you get an overall voting rate, which is just the top number that you see there. We don't just give you percentages in these reports. You also get the specific numbers. And these, I should say, these numbers are estimates, and we're constantly updating our methods. But we give you the best approximations of numbers on your campus. So we'll show you things like your total student enrollment, and then you get the numbers. You can see, rather than just percentages, you can kind of have a little bit more context around what those numbers mean. And that gets really important when you look at some of the other breakdowns, which I'll show you in a second. So you'll see like kind of the jumps and drops in numbers of total students, the voting rate, the registration rate. Like I said, we break it down by different groups. So one of the pages that we give you is by age group. So you can see on your campus who votes the most across 2 different election years in most of these reports. This sample data is pretty traditional at schools around the country, but also just the general population in the US. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. And one of the reasons for this is, you know, one of the things that people who study this describe this as is they say voting is habit forming, which is true. I mean, once you vote, you're more likely to vote again, generally speaking. So in that sense, it's habit forming. But really what happens is once you register to vote and once you vote, the people that run political campaigns are more likely to contact you because you're now on the voter roll. And someone who is contacted by a campaign and asked to vote and reminded of elections, that's another indicator of you know, your likelihood goes up to vote. So once you get in the system, it becomes a loop where you get contacted and then you're more likely to vote from there. And so as you get older, there's more chances for that to happen. So that's why you see the rate going up gradually. Lauren, I have both screens as a presentation for me. So if there are questions and you want to hop in at some point, just let me know. I'll take questions at the end, but I see the chat icon, but I don't see what the questions are.
Yeah, I'm answering some of the questions directly if I can, and then I'm going to take note of all of them, so I'll help you kind of weed through them at the end.
Okay, sounds good. So one of the other ways that you get a breakdown of your report is by field of study. So there are thousands of majors in this country, but the US Ed Department breaks down areas of study in a particular way, and then we collapse it a little bit further. Usually you have sort of 2 big columns of who voted in the state reports, and then on your campus you'll get kind of like the highlights of your large turnout numbers and some of your lower ones. In Oklahoma, actually, one of the things that holds, which always seems to interest people, is, you know, you might expect political science majors to vote at really high rates, which they do, but library sciences is always really towards the top, and it's no different actually in Oklahoma. In the sample data here, you see what we do is we highlight some of the higher rates here. This is communications and journalism, and this sample is one of the higher ones. Computer and information sciences, one of the lower ones. And you see that we put an arrow to indicate whether it went up or dropped since the last comparable election. In general, this is one of the things that people often ask about. Social sciences tend to vote at higher rates. Education, library sciences, and actually the STEM fields and business are usually the ones that are a little bit lower. So like I said, in 2018, in our office, we're constantly working with these numbers, and we're constantly having discussions about what it all means. And I'll say that in the lead up to the 2018 election, we had kind of an informal thing in our office of like, what do you think the number will be? And none of us anticipated just how much the voting rate was going to jump from 2014 to 2018. So this is laid out all of the schools that participate in NSLVE. And you can see where this dotted red line is on the left. The arrow to the left indicates the number of schools that decreased from 2014 midterms to the 2018 midterms, and everything to the right is an increase. And down here is how much they increased. So 0 to 3 percentage points, 18 to 21 percentage points, greater than 36 percentage points. But overall, 99% of the schools in NSLVE saw a rate increase from 2014 to 2018. And there's likely a lot of reasons for that. There's so much attention right now on political engagement, but also there's a ton of effort happening on colleges and university campuses like yours. There are more staffing, considerations when it comes to civic engagement. There's more, I think, external groups out there that are helping people understand, like, what are the laws, what are the deadlines. There's some more online tools. But overall, it was really incredible how many schools increased, and the fact that they increased so much. So looking at the national numbers a little bit more, this can be a little bit confusing, the average institutional rate versus national student rate, but 39.1% is the average if you just average every single campus against each other. So it's just under 40%. But if you just do the numbers of students and how much they registered to vote, it was a little over 40. So in general, the way to understand this, though, is that the voting rate in 2014 midterms was around 19%. It was a little under 20. And in 2018, it was right around 40. So the voting rate doubled from 2014 to 2018. In 2016, it went up. But it went up a little bit. It did not go up as much. The overall voting rate in 2016 was a little over 50%, which was, like I said, just a couple points higher than 2012. We were really anticipating huge numbers in 2020. Now we're not so sure because of everything that's happening with the pandemic. There's a lot of increased social action and attention to issues, but I think that there's going to be some real serious structural barriers to voting. So that's why I think the work that you all are doing is so important. It's one of the reasons. And I think it's really important that everyone kind of stays on top of all the developments that happen between now and November. In terms of just the registration numbers, the registration number in 2018 went up about 8 points to 73.3% in 2018, up from 65.5%. And the turnout of registered students was 55%, which was way up from 29.6%. So what does that mean? That means that the registration rate was pretty, it was somewhat comparable between 2014 and 2018. But what changed in those 2 years is that the students that registered actually turned out to vote in huge numbers. You see there's a big difference between the 55% and just under 30% of who turned out versus just like a registration number, which we've had many of those efforts on campus for decades. But what seems to be changing is that students are actually showing up to vote when the time comes to vote. Looking at the numbers just in a couple other ways, so you can see in our national report, we look at things like class level. So you can see first year students versus sophomore, junior, senior, and then graduate students. The numbers just increased across the board. And in general, it's kind of like tiered, like the age thing, where it's, first year, second year, third year, fourth year, where it generally increases over time, depending on the school. And then you can see by field of study, here are some of the highlights of rate changes. Education and social science is really high, humanities and health kind of in the middle, and then business and STEM a little bit lower. But if you look at this change column, you'll see that across the board, again, the numbers just really jumped in 2018. So even though our office is pretty new, we're really interested to see over many years what happens, because some of the questions that we get asked and some of the things that we're trying to learn are hard to say, because 2012 had its own unique set of circumstances, 2014, 16, 18, and 2020 has the most I would argue, unique circumstances of any election year. So once we have like a few decades worth of data, we'll really start being able to draw some conclusions around what's happening. So right now we're kind of digging in and trying to figure out what we can of the numbers that we have. If you want to see more on this, we have, you can just Google Democracy Counts 2018 or go to this website that's up on the screen. This is where we have kind of a full report. And one of the things I'll point out that I think is really hopefully pretty useful to practitioners is we highlight some of the stories that we thought were really interesting. So we have 4 different campuses, 4 different institutional types also that had some stories to tell around what they were doing in 2018 that I think drove participation. James Madison University in Virginia talked about some of their local candidates got in a bus and then went from residence hall to residence hall and did little town forums for different students. And the students were like really excited about it at that school. But there's, like I said, 4 different highlights in that report. I'll just mention this quickly. So from our NSLVE data at IDHE, we mapped out the average rates versus what was happening on campuses, and we looked at the schools. We were really interested in the colleges and universities that were exceeding what we would expect based on their makeup of their student body, and then schools that were doing way worse. And we actually went and visited and collected qualitative data on those campuses to see what's happening here. What are you doing? How are you sort of beating the odds on your campus? And we saw 5 big themes, and I can share this report with Lauren to share with you all if this is of interest to you. We saw really strong social cohesion, so student-faculty relationships, student-to-student relationships, but generally people at those schools felt like they were cared for and that they cared for each other. Also, we saw diversity and equity as part of intentional practice. It was part of that social cohesion idea that different views were valued, different identities were valued, and that everyone felt like that was a part of what made them an important piece of educational excellence at those schools. The most prominent theme we saw at the positive schools were discussion of politics across campus. So it wasn't just happening in the political science classrooms, but in the math classroom, they would be talking about gerrymandering, or in engineering classrooms, they'd be talking about equity issues of infrastructure and bridges that are collapsing versus places where there's money to support it. So they talked about the public implications of the work that they were doing in the classroom. At these schools, student activism was a big piece. It was seen as and understood as an important piece of educational learning. And students were really involved in institutional decision making. We had one administrator who said to us, I have committees for everything, and students always sit on those committees. So, we ask for their input when we're changing the rug color of the student union and those sorts of questions, all the way up to bigger decisions. And lastly, there was a buzz on campus around elections and around political engagement. It was, elections were sort of a fun time. People were excited to participate, and they would have like games for the debate, watch parties. They would have tabling and those sorts of traditional things, but it was always kind of a fun thing, and people were excited to engage. So after we put out that report, a lot of schools said to us, well, how do we become one of those schools? What can we do? So we put out this report called Election Imperatives, and you can find version 2.0, which is the most updated one, on our website, which again, I'll share that link in a moment. And so what we do in this report is we take the themes from Politics 365 and say, here are 10 big picture recommendations of things that you can do. And in that report, it's digital, so there's links to all sorts of resources. It helps you kind of navigate the field that can be a little bit confusing of how many, there's all sorts of nonprofit organizations out there that will help you, understand what's on the ballot or join a challenge, or, like there's so many groups out there that this report kind of breaks it into themes of things that you can do, and then it helps you navigate like which ones you might want to tackle at your school. So our plan for this year was to promote this report again, and then the pandemic hit, and so we said to ourselves, you know, we really have an obligation here to help practitioners and faculty really think through how do we pivot, how do we work around this and work through it. So we wrote a companion guide to election imperatives, and then the period of increased social activism sprung up as we were writing it, and we said, all right, we went back to the drawing board and redid it again. And the resulting document is this report that I mentioned earlier called Election Imperatives 2020. So in this report, it's about a dozen pages. We start with the context of 2020 and help folks think through, all right, well, what is happening? Like, what is different about this year? What are we going to have to adapt to, and what do we want to adapt to? And then we go through an equity checklist for people to kind of make equitable considerations as they're doing all of their work. And then we break down recommendations by area, and we do 2-page guides essentially for senior leaders, presidents, provosts, vice presidents, and then kind of the academic side of faculty and academic affairs, and then student-centered staff like student affairs and organizations and kind of third-party coalitions. So both of this and Election Imperatives 2.0 are at this link on our website, idhe.tufts.edu/election imperatives. And they're meant to be read together, right? So like the 10 recommendations, and then you kind of layer Election Imperatives 2020 on top of it. And hopefully this can kind of help you as you work on plans for the fall and think about like what resources you want to take advantage of as you move forward. As I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of resources you can find on our website, which again is just idhe.tufts.edu. We have a tab for resources. We have data visuals that you can look through to kind of dig in a little bit deeper on some of the numbers that we've put out. And we have briefs and discussion guides and some of the national numbers that we've talked about. So I'll kind of close before opening up for questions with some actions that you can take around this work. So like I said, you can follow our office on Twitter. We share stories that we're reading around that intersection of democracy and higher ed. We share new resources there. This week, that's where we first announced Election Imperatives 2020. And then we have, a few threads where we go through like what's in the report. You can sign up for our mailing list, and we do our best not to spam you. I would say we send out a newsletter about every 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what's going on in the world. You can search to see if your school is an NSLVE at the campus search button on our website. And you can, of course, always reach out to us with any questions that you might have. Email idhe@tufts.edu. So, questions?
I haven't really gotten any questions necessarily. I wasn't able to answer, but maybe you have some more information on where there's comparative data or studies from like college students based then around the rest of the population. So like NSLVE is college students, but then is there any data that we can look at to compare college students to the general population?
Yeah, so like I said, so Circle is really a great resource for this. And the way that they put out data sometimes is a little bit different than us, because they kind of run surveys often where you can see, like they have data from the primaries of 2020, and you can compare the youth numbers, because they usually look at 18 to 29-year-olds, sometimes 18 to 25, but we're, you know, we're different in that, you know, at college campuses, it's not everyone it falls within like that youth bracket. In fact, many don't. So it's not a perfect comparison, but that's one way to look at to kind of see what's out there. And of course, there's other big research centers that share kind of the national numbers. For us, I think the Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition paid for a state report, which, Lauren, I'm not sure if you have that, but I think Clarissa Unger could probably, or Catherine Quinn could share that with you.
Yes, I have the state report.
Yeah, so that provides some good context for the state. And on our website, we'll be updating it soon, but we usually put up cluster reports, or so that's things like all campuses that are in the NSPA LEAD program, or, you know, like we'll break it down across different categories so that schools can see. Our office is really small. It's about 7 people that work there, and there are a few people that kind of off the bat are like really focused on 1 or 2 things, and so it can be a little bit of a challenge for us to keep up with every state. And so like if you're interested in kind of us doing a follow-up on something, you can reach out to us. But because we're such a small team, like that's how we basically pay to operate, is we'll do some like kind of data projects for a fee. I'm seeing a couple of questions here. I see it got answered already, but I think this one is worth raising. How much is it for institutions to sign up for NSLVE? Thank you, Lauren. It is free. And hopefully this doesn't come across as like a sales pitch or anything. We just think it's really important. I mean, this is a labor of love for us in our office. It's a service that's expensive, but that we basically pursue grants from foundations often to help pay for it. And then we do, like I said, some like data projects for people as requested, and we'll do like workshops and things like that for a fee. But we're really pretty committed to keeping NSLVE free. We think it's really an important tool for schools to be able to measure the work that they're doing. Because like I said, there's not really a lot of ways to do that. And some of the other groups out there that have you know, measurements, they often do use NSLVE data. So for us, it's kind of about bringing as many schools that want to be into the study, and then using that national data to share kind of national trends, and then for individual campuses, helping them see how to read a report, how to understand it, and how to use it on their campus using things like the election imperatives report.
Yeah, there's some questions here about what is the difference between student rates and the registered voting rates? So I think the question is asking what's the difference between registration rates and then of those, like, that voting rate on the NSLVE data.
Yeah, so the registration rate will always be higher than the voting rate, because in order to vote, you have to first register. So the registration rate is, okay, let's say I have 10,000 students on my campus. How many of those 10,000 registered to vote? And just because you registered to vote doesn't mean you actually ended up voting. You know, you could register and then just not show up to vote. So the registration rate is whether or not the students registered, and then the voting rate is how many students actually voted. So like I said, it's, you know, it's like all students. I'm not sure if you can see me or if you're just seeing the screen, but imagine a big circle that says, here's your total student population, and then within that is how many registered, and then within the registration numbers, how many of them actually voted.
Yeah.
Could I follow up just briefly? The voting rate of registered students, what is the difference between that and the voting rate?
So we always debate every time we put out one of these reports whether or not to even include that number. But we think it is important because the voting rate of registered students shows you kind of where the gap is in the process. So if you're doing this work and you're like, you know, we want students to participate, a lot of times schools will say, we just want to sink all of our time and resources into getting students to register to vote. But the voting rate of registered students tells you how many of the ones that registered voted. So that number removes anyone who didn't register to vote. And you're saying, okay, of the 10,000 students, 8,000 of them registered. And then you're saying, well, what percent of those 8,000 voted? Because what we don't want to see is for schools to say, all right, hey, we got everyone on campus registered, and then no one actually votes. Like you need to kind of see the whole process through to the voting booth, or to the mail-in or whatever it is, whatever method they use, absentee. So the voting rate of registered voters, I understand that that's confusing. I think we have it written up on our website too and in the report, but it's, again, it's who actually voted of those that registered.
Okay,
a question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead if you want to answer, if you want to pick them out.
I see a question about, does IDHE identify state voting policies that might affect low or high turnout difference among states? So generally, I would say the answer to that is sort of yes. Like I said, we're really small, and actually of our team, it depends on like the specific moment, but usually it's like 3 to 4 of us that are engaged in kind of like the research side of it at any given moment. And so we're really, really tight on how much time we have to do these things. We have an advisory board of faculty members around the country who are studying some of these things. And so we work with them to see, like to investigate questions like that. Sometimes you can see it. Like if you look at at certain state report, or sorry, at certain national numbers, you'll see like where states fall, and you can develop a hypothesis to say, oh, they passed a really restrictive law this year. Did that affect turnout in some way? But that's one of those research questions where we're working towards, but we're still like a relatively new office. But there are a lot of folks out there that are investigating things like that.
Okay, there is a question about in states that have higher numbers, can that be attributed to any state efforts, or do you believe it is those efforts are based on like the college local initiatives that are happening?
We think it's all part of it, right? So like the numbers that you see, like the way I always think of it is like a pie chart where you say, 33% can be probably attributed to this, 25% is attributed to this, and then like the remainder is this. It all can make a difference. On-campus initiatives, I mean, there are some real, maybe this resonates with people in the audience, I'm not sure, but I feel like, so we are always in contact and talking with people at all sorts of schools. It always seems like there's 1 or 2 people at every school that are the ones that are like really driving home the effort on their campus. And often it's not part of their job description, or it's not a big part of their job description. Like it might be 5% of your time is overseeing this organization, but they end up spending, percentages 95 to 150% of their time. They're working overtime to make these things happen. So I just want to say, like, I think that the work that you all are doing and that people do on campus is so important, because a lot of times if someone left, like there's no one else there to do it. Local groups are really important also. In 2018, we called around to probably like 100 different colleges and universities around the country just to kind of get a feel for what's happening, as we were running a survey to just kind of hear, like, tell us what's happening there. And local groups were really important. It's not just national organizations, it's, what works in your area, and there's different groups that have different, the League of Women Voters in Maine is big. And I think there was you can kind of like go to each school and like they each have their local groups that they work with, right? And in terms of state efforts, that's something we want to see more of. So we're constantly reaching out to secretaries of state. If you all have contacts in any of those offices, we think that there are some really good ways that that secretaries of state can make a difference in terms of lowering barriers, making the laws in such a way that they're not excluding college student participation, and thinking about things like what is our goal as a state, and then like how do we reach that. So it's all important, and sorry for kind of hedging, but I like the truth is that I think that it is all really important. By the way, so Lauren, I see you're doing a great job answering some of these specific campus-specific questions. But I'll say that if we don't get to some of these, or if you have remaining questions afterwards, on our website, if you email idhe@tufts.edu, we have someone who will get back to you and help you like navigate the process of signing up or figuring out if your school is fully in. And she's really great. So.
Okay, I think we may have time for one more question that I was adding. I was looking and then I lost it. Okay, so you mentioned Oklahoma ranked lower than other states. How do we compare specifically with other student voting rates? If you could answer that quickly, or if you know that answer off the top of your head.
Yeah, so if you look at the state report, you'll see basically, I'm a little hesitant to like go deeply into the numbers because, like I said, I think we have 8 schools in the whole state of Oklahoma, and I know that there are many more than that. In terms of number, the reason that we still feel comfortable doing a state report is because we have such a high percent of students, because we have some of the big institutions there. But we would know that a little bit better if some of the smaller number schools join the study. But I would say that what we see so far is that the numbers lag like a couple percentage points behind national averages. And states, you might be surprised, like they vary really widely. And it's a matter of how many students are in state, which is sometimes it's easier to vote in the state. Sometimes it's about the election laws, and sometimes it's about, like kind of smaller efforts that just become successful. And if I can just, like, I know we're out of time, but I just want to, I see Erica Stone Burnett asked the question of what are the most common barriers? We have a report on our website that's, we'll probably update it at some point soon, but it goes through barriers that you can see, and some of them are still very relevant. Some of it is around districting and like where, it's around like voter ID and like what is accepted and what's not. And those are kind of structural barriers. Those are the things that are the things you might expect as barriers. But I just want to leave you with thinking about motivational barriers and getting your students motivated and having students motivate each other to think about what are the issues that they care about. Because nowadays, a lot of the college students, from our data that we've seen, they're not necessarily affiliated with a party. Sometimes there's a candidate that they feel resonates with them, but there's not as much loyalty to party, but it's to issues. And I think that that's really important. I mean, for us, it's about reducing apathy. It's about getting people engaged in issues that they care about and working towards seeing positive change in those areas. So think about the structural barriers that you have in place, and then think about the motivational barriers, because they're both really important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all this information. I really hope that campuses that aren't currently participating, look into getting your campuses involved in this study. And I know that all of the staff members at IDHE are super responsive. They are super helpful, and they are really wonderful about navigating the space, the process, and providing information when institutions feel insecure or concerned about how data is being used or shared on your campuses. So they've got lots of resources on, how to talk to those people, like legal or your research departments and things like that. So definitely reach out to them for those questions. So, and thank you so much, Adam, for spending part of your Saturday with us from the East Coast.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Like I said in the chat, enjoy the rest of your summit. And again, feel free to reach out anytime, idhe@tufts.edu. And Yui, who's our main campus contact, would send it out to whoever on the team is the best person to answer your questions. But we're always happy to hop on email or on the phone or whatever is best to help you all with your efforts. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. All right, so this time we're going to transition right into